The story of Karbala, a legacy of truth and sacrifice. The scorching sun loomed over the desert of Karbala, casting long shadows over the dry, barren land. Hazrat Hussain R.A., standing tall and resolute, looked upon his family and companions, his eyes reflecting both sorrow and unshaken faith. The journey that had brought him here was not one of ambition, but of duty, a duty to truth and justice. The call to stand against tyranny. After the passing of Prophet Muhammad the world of Islam saw drastic political shifts. Hazrat Hussain R.A., the grandson of the Prophet grew up embodying his grandfather's values of justice, mercy, and unwavering faith. His father, Hazrat Ali R.A., and brother, Hazrat Hussain R.A., had both witnessed treachery in the political landscape. When Yazid, son of Muawiyah, took control of the caliphate, he demanded allegiance from all, including Hazrat Hussain R.A. Hussain R.A. knew what Yazid stood for: tyranny, corruption, and the betrayal of Islamic principles. How could he, the grandson of the Prophet pledge allegiance to a ruler who twisted faith for personal gain? Meanwhile, letters poured in from Kufa, where people swore loyalty to Hussain R.A. and begged him to lead them against Yazid. He had a choice: comply and live comfortably, or resist and face inevitable death. But for Hussain R.A., the choice had already been made long ago. He remembered the words of the Prophet, Hussain is from me, and I am from Hussain. Whoever loves him, loves me. He could not let Islam be reduced to a tool for despots. A journey of sacrifice. Despite warnings from companions and family, Hussain R.A. began his journey towards Kufa with his family and a small group of loyal followers. Along the way, he received devastating news. Muslim Ibn Aqil, his cousin sent to assess Kufa's situation, had been betrayed and executed. Kufa, once eager to stand with him, now trembled in fear under Yazid's governor, Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad. The betrayal was not unexpected, yet it was painful. Some urged Hussain R.A. to turn back, but he pressed on, for turning back meant accepting oppression. Soon, Yazid's army intercepted him in the plains of Karbala. They cut off his access to water, forcing his family and companions, including children, to endure unbearable thirst under the scorching sun. Despite these hardships, not a single soul from his camp wavered. Loyalty and love for Hussain R.A. and the truth he stood for kept them strong. The night before battle, Hussain R.A. extinguished the torches in his tent and told his companions they were free to leave. Tomorrow they seek my life, not yours. Go, and I will not hold it against you. Not a single one left. The day of Ashura, a battle against injustice. The morning of the 10th of Muharram arrived. The small, thirsty, and weary group of Hussain R.A. stood against Yazid's thousands. One by one, his companions fell, each fighting bravely, each sacrificing themselves for the truth. His nephew, Qasim, barely a teenager, asked for permission to fight. Hussain R.A. hesitated, but how could he deny him the honor he sought? Qasim fought valiantly until he was martyred. Then Hussain's R.A. 6-month-old son, Aliasgar, cried out in thirst. With tears in his eyes, Hussain R.A. held the baby towards the enemy, pleading for just a drop of water. In response, an arrow pierced the infant's throat. The tragedy mounted, yet Hussain R.A. stood firm. Alone, he fought till he could stand no more, his body covered in wounds, his strength fading. As he fell to the ground, he smiled. His sacrifice had secured the truth. With his last breath, he whispered verses from the Quran, reaffirming his unwavering faith. The aftermath, a legacy that lives on. The women and children of Hussain's R.A. family were taken captive and paraded through the streets of Kufa and Damascus. But they did not bow. His sister, Hazrat Zainab R.A., stood in Yazid's court, her voice like thunder. "O Yazid, do whatever you wish, but know this, by Allah, you will never erase our memory." True to her words, Yazid's victory was hollow. The martyrdom of Hussain R.A. shook the Muslim world. The people realized their mistake in abandoning him. Revolts arose, and Yazid's name became a symbol of disgrace, while Hussain R.A. became immortalized as the face of resistance and righteousness. Lessons from Karbala. Karbala is not just a tragedy, it is a lesson. It teaches that standing for truth comes with a price, but that price is never too high when justice is at stake. Hussain, R.A., could have lived in luxury, but he chose dignity over submission. His sacrifice reminds us that oppression thrives only when the righteous remain silent. Even today, in every struggle against tyranny, the name of Hussain, R.A., echoes. The sands of Karbala may have been stained with blood, but from it, the seeds of truth and justice were sown, inspiring generations to come. The bloodline of the prophet saw a legacy of honor. The dim glow of the lantern flickered in the house of Hazrat Fatima, R.A. The night was silent, but within those walls, a conversation was taking place that would echo through time. Hazrat Ali, R.A., watched as his two young sons, Hussain, R.A., and Hussain, R.A., played under the loving gaze of their mother. They were not just children, they were the living legacy of the Prophet Muhammad, SAW. From the very beginning, their lineage carried an unshakable weight. They were the grandsons of the greatest man to walk the earth, the sons of Ali, R.A., the Lion of Allah, and Fatima, R.A., the beloved daughter of the Prophet, SAW. The Prophet SAW himself had declared, Hussain and Hussain are the leaders of the youth of paradise. Yet this lineage was not just about honor, it was about responsibility, a childhood under the shadow of greatness. Even as a child, Hussain, R.A., displayed a striking resemblance to the Prophet SAW, not just in features, but in character. One day, as he and his brother sat near the Prophet SAW in the mosque, a companion watched the tender moment. The Prophet SAW placed a hand on each of their heads and said, "O Allah, I love them. So love those who love them." But love came with trials. The world did not allow those of noble character to remain in peace. When the Prophet SAW passed away, the family of al-Bayt felt the weight of sorrow heavier than anyone else. Hussain, R.A., and Hussain, R.A., were still young, but they could sense the shift in the air. The political landscape of Islam was changing, and with it their lives. The lessons of Hazrat Ali, R.A. Hazrat Ali, R.A., their father, knew that his sons would one day carry the burden of truth upon their shoulders. He raised them with wisdom, preparing them for the struggles ahead. One evening, under the darkening sky of Medina, Ali, R.A., sat with Hussain, R.A., who was still a boy. He looked into his son's eyes and said, "Remember, my son, justice is not always welcomed. There will come a day when standing for the truth will mean standing alone. When that day comes, will you have the courage to face it?" Hussain, R.A., though young, did not hesitate. "If the truth is with me, I will never leave its side." Ali, R.A., smiled, but there was sorrow in his eyes. He had seen the future in a way only a father could. He knew that one day Hussain, R.A., would face a test far greater than any man should bear. A grandfather's love and a prophecy of sacrifice. The Prophet SAW had foreseen the fate of Hussain, R.A. Once, when Hussain, R.A., was still a child, the Prophet SAW held him close and wept. When asked why he was crying, he replied, "Jibreel has informed me that my grandson will be martyred in a land called Karbala." Fatima, R.A., trembled at the thought. "My son," the Prophet SAW nodded. "He will stand when others falter. He will hold onto truth when the world drowns in falsehood. And he will give his life, but his sacrifice will never be in vain." The words hung in the air like an unbroken promise. The betrayal that changed everything. Years passed, and the prophecy began unfolding. After the martyrdom of Hazrat Ali, R.A., Hussain, R.A., became caliph, but he was betrayed by those who claimed to support him. The same people who once called for justice abandoned him when the time came to stand firm. Forced into a treaty with Muawiyah, Hussain, R.A., stepped down to prevent bloodshed. Hussain, R.A., watched as his brother, the rightful leader, was silenced by treachery. He clenched his fists, remembering the words of his father, "Standing for the truth will mean standing alone." When Hussain, R.A., was poisoned and martyred, Hussain, R.A., mourned not just for his brother, but for the future. He knew that the responsibility now rested on him. The looming shadow of Karbala. As Yazid rose to power and demanded allegiance, Hussain, R.A., knew he had reached the moment his grandfather had foretold. He remembered his childhood. The prophet saw love, his father's lessons, and his brother's betrayal. He had been raised not to rule, but to resist. The bloodline of the prophet, Saw, was not one of privilege. It was one of sacrifice. He would not bow, even if it meant walking toward certain death. And so, the journey to Karbala began, where history would be written in the blood of the righteous. The early years of Hazrat Hussain are a childhood of love and destiny. The streets of Medina were alive with the echoes of children's laughter, but one home stood apart from the rest, the house of Hazrat Ali, R.A., and Hazrat Fatima, R.A. It was not just any household. It was the home of the beloved family of the Prophet Muhammad SAW. Within its walls, two young boys, Hassan R.A. and Hussain R.A., played under the watchful eyes of their grandfather. Hazrat Hussain R.A., the younger of the two, had inherited the Prophet's noble features, his bright eyes, his gentle smile, and most of all, his unshakable spirit. But more than appearance, he carried something greater, his grandfather's love and the weight of a destiny foretold. The Prophet's saw endless love for Hussain R.A. From the moment of his birth, Hazrat Hussain R.A. was cherished by the Prophet SAW. He held the infant close, whispered the adhan in his ears, and chose his name, Hussain, the little Hassan. The companions often saw how the Prophet SAW treated his grandsons, not just as children, but as a part of himself. One day the Prophet SAW was delivering a sermon in the mosque when Lil Hussain, R.A., barely a toddler, stumbled in, his small feet moving as fast as they could towards his grandfather. The congregation watched as the Prophet SAW paused, stepped down from the pulpit, and lifted the child into his arms. He smiled and said, "Indeed, this son of mine is a leader." But love also came with warnings. Once Hazrat Jibreel A.S. appeared before the Prophet SAW, while he held young Hussain, R.A., in his lap. The angel's voice was solemn. "O Messenger of Allah, do you love him?" The Prophet SAW kissed his grandson's forehead and replied, "How could I not?" Jibreel A.S. hesitated before saying, "O Prophet of Allah, your Ummah will betray him, and he will be martyred in a land called Karbala." Tears welled in the Prophet's SAW eyes. He held Hussain R.A. closer, whispering, "O Allah, bless my grandson. Give him patience. Grant him victory, even in death." A childhood in the shade of greatness. Growing up in Medina, Hussain R.A. was surrounded by the best of men, the Prophet SAW, Hazrat Ali R.A., and the noble companions. He spent his days learning not just words of wisdom, but the deeper meaning of sacrifice and faith. One day, as the Prophet SAW walked through the city, he saw a group of children playing. Among them was Hussain R.A. The Prophet SAW approached quietly, and as soon as Hussain R.A. saw him, he ran towards his grandfather. The Prophet SAW opened his arms, but at the last moment, playfully stepped aside. Hussain R.A. laughed and tried again. After the third time, the Prophet SAW finally caught him, lifting him high and kissing him. The companions watched and smiled, but the Prophet's SAW expression turned serious. He looked at his companions and said, "Hussain is from me, and I am from Hussain. O Allah, love those who love him." The words confused some. Of course, Hussain R.A. was from him, but how could the Prophet SAW be from Hussain? They did not yet understand that one day it would be Hussain R.A. who would carry the true essence of Islam forward, not with power, but with sacrifice. The training of a leader. Hussain R.A. was not just a beloved grandson. He was raised to be a warrior and a leader. His father, Hazrat Ali R.A., was known for his bravery, and he made sure his sons inherited the same strength. He trained them in combat, taught them justice, and reminded them of their duty to the truth. One evening, Ali R.A. took Hussain R.A. to the battlefield training ground. "Do you know what it means to be a warrior, my son?" he asked. Hussain R.A., barely 10, held his wooden sword tightly. "To be brave and strong," he answered. Ali R.A. shook his head. "No, my son. A warrior is the one who stands for justice when the world stands against him. A warrior is not afraid of death if it comes in the path of Allah." Hussain R.A. listened carefully, his young mind absorbing the lesson. He did not know then that one day he would be tested in a way no warrior had been before. A glimpse of the future. As he grew, the love of the people for Hussain, R.A. only increased. He was known for his kindness, his wisdom beyond his years, and his unwavering sense of justice. But those who envied his family, the power-hungry men who sought to control Islam for their own gain, also watched him. When the Prophet passed away, the world of Medina changed. Conflicts arose, and the unity he had built began to crack. Hussain, R.A., was still a boy, but he could see the pain in his father's eyes, the sadness in his mother's silence. He did not understand everything then, but he would soon learn that the world would not allow righteousness to go unchallenged. Years later, when his father was martyred and his brother poisoned, Hussain, R.A., would finally come to understand the true weight of his grandfather's words. Hussain is from me, and I am from Hussain. He was not just a child of the Prophet's family. He was the guardian of his mission. And one day, on the burning sands of Karbala, he would prove it. The struggle for truth, from caliphate to monarchy. The streets of Medina, once filled with the warmth of the Prophet's presence, now carried an eerie silence. The golden days of unity had begun to fade, and an air of uncertainty loomed over the Ummah. After the passing of the Prophet Muhammad the leadership of the Muslims fell into the hands of the rightly guided caliphs. They ruled with justice, upholding the principles of Islam, but after the martyrdom of Hazrat Ali, R.A., everything began to change. Hazrat Hassan, R.A., the elder brother of Hazrat Hussain, R.A., was the rightful successor, but the world of politics was not the same as it had been during their grandfather's time. Deception had crept into the hearts of men, and loyalty was a rare treasure. The betrayal of Hazrat Hassan, R.A., as the son of Ali, R.A., and the grandson of the Prophet Hazrat Hassan, R.A., was chosen as the caliph by the people of Kufa. His rule, however, was met with immediate challenges. Muawiyah, the governor of Syria, refused to recognize him and declared himself the true leader of the Muslims. This was not merely a political dispute, it was a battle of principles. Hassan, R.A., wanted to restore the justice of the caliphate, while Muawiyah sought to establish power through monarchy. The two forces prepared for war, but just as Hassan, R.A., was ready to lead his army, betrayal struck from within. His own commanders, men who had sworn loyalty to him, were bribed by Muawiyah. Gold and promises of power turned them against their rightful leader. One by one, his trusted generals abandoned him. Some defected to Muawiyah's side, while others spread rumors that Hassan, R.A., was unfit to lead. Soon, the army that once stood proudly behind him was filled with doubt and treachery. Seeing the division and fearing unnecessary bloodshed, Hazrat Hassan, R.A., made a painful decision. He stepped down from the caliphate and signed a treaty with Muawiyah, under the condition that the leadership would return to the rightful heirs of the Prophet's family after Muawiyah's rule. But even as the ink dried on the treaty, Hassan, R.A., knew it was a lie. Muawiyah had no intention of honoring the agreement. Hassan, R.A., withdrew from politics, retreating to Medina, where he lived in quiet dignity. But his silence did not mean peace. Not long after, he was poisoned, a conspiracy suspected to be orchestrated by Muawiyah himself. His body weakened, and his health deteriorated rapidly. As he lay on his deathbed, he turned to his younger brother, Hussain, R.A., and with his final breaths, he whispered, "Prepare yourself, my brother. A day will come when you must stand where I could not." The rise of monarchy. Muawiyah now had complete control, and the principles of the caliphate were slowly fading into history. The Islamic government, once built on justice and leadership chosen by the people, was turning into a dynasty where power was inherited rather than earned. The teachings of the Prophet were being manipulated for political gain, and oppression crept into the lands once ruled by fairness. For years, Muawiyah ruled unchallenged. But as his end drew near, he made the most dangerous move yet. He appointed his son, Yazid, as his successor. This was a direct violation of the treaty signed with Hassan, R.A. The leadership of the Muslim world was now treated as a kingdom, passed down like a family inheritance. Yazid was nothing like his father. While Muawiyah was a skilled politician, Yazid was reckless, arrogant, and openly defied Islamic values. His rule marked the beginning of an era of corruption, where truth was suppressed and opposition was crushed with force. A challenge to Yazid's rule. One by one, Yazid demanded allegiance from the prominent figures of the Ummah. Most, fearing his wrath, reluctantly accepted. But there was one man who refused, Hazrat Hussain R.A. Hussain R.A. had watched the betrayal of his brother, the death of his father, and the manipulation of power. He had seen Islam twisted for political ambitions, and he knew that if he remained silent, the truth would be lost forever. So when Yazid's messengers came to Medina, demanding his pledge of loyalty, Hussain R.A. stood firm. "A man like me does not bow to a man like him," he declared. With those words, the fate of Karbala was sealed. The forces of tyranny and truth would soon collide, and Hussain R.A. would be forced to make the greatest sacrifice the world had ever seen. The sands of Karbala awaited, and history was about to be written in the blood of the righteous. The rise of Yazid and the call to Kufa. The air in Medina was thick with tension. Ever since the death of Muawiyah, an uneasy silence had settled over the city, like the calm before a storm. Everyone knew what was coming. Yazid had ascended the throne, and his first order of business was to demand allegiance from the most powerful figures in the Muslim world. For Yazid, Hazrat Hussain R.A. was not just another opposition figure. He was a threat to everything Yazid stood for. As the grandson of the Prophet Muhammad saw, Hussain R.A. carried the weight of Islam's true teachings. He was a symbol of justice, integrity, and unshakable faith. If he refused to recognize Yazid's rule, it would expose the corruption of the monarchy. Yazid's messengers arrived in Medina, delivering the order, "Pledge your allegiance, or prepare for the consequences." But Hussain R.A. did not hesitate. His answer was swift, unwavering. "A man like me does not bow to a man like him." With those words, Hussain R.A. sealed his fate. The call from Kufa. Word of Hussein's R.A. defiance spread like wildfire, reaching the distant lands of Kufa. Kufa had once been loyal to Hazrat Ali R.A. and his family, and its people longed for a righteous leader. When they heard that Hussain R.A. had refused Yazid, they saw an opportunity to rise against oppression. Letters flooded Medina, carried by desperate messengers. Each one carried the same plea. "O grandson of the Prophet, come to us. We will fight for you, we will protect you, we will make you our leader." Hussain R.A. read the letters in silence. The weight of responsibility pressed upon him. Could he trust them? Would they stand by him when the time came? To assess the situation, he sent his cousin, Muslim Ibn Aqil, to Kufa. If the people were sincere, Muslim would confirm it. Days passed before word finally arrived. Kufa had pledged its loyalty. Muslim Ibn Aqil wrote to Hussain R.A., urging him to come. The people had sworn to protect him, to fight for justice. It was the sign Hussain R.A. needed. Despite warnings from his family and companions, despite knowing the dangers that lay ahead, Hussain R.A. prepared for the journey. But what he did not know was that the city that had sworn to welcome him with open arms would soon become the very place of his betrayal. The betrayal of Kufa. As Hussain R.A. began his journey, Yazid's spies worked behind the scenes. The governor of Kufa, Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad, learned of Muslim Ibn Aqil's presence and moved swiftly. He manipulated the people, threatened them with death, bribed the weak, and turned fear into a weapon. One by one, the Kufans abandoned Muslim. Those who had sworn loyalty just days before now locked their doors, afraid to be seen helping him. Alone and hunted, Muslim Ibn Aqil was finally captured. Before he was executed, he sent a final message to Hussain R.A. "Kufa is no longer safe. Do not come." But it was too late. Hussain R.A. was already on his way. The sands of Karbala awaited, and destiny was about to unfold. The journey to Karbala. The desert wind whispered against the tents as the caravan prepared to depart. Hazrat Hussain R.A. stood amidst his family and loyal companions, his gaze set on the horizon. He already knew this journey would not lead to power, nor to victory in the worldly sense. But that was never the goal. For Hussain R.A., the path to Karbala was not just a physical journey. It was a spiritual test, a call to uphold the truth. Every step forward was a step away from comfort, from safety, from life itself. Yet, his resolve did not waver. Many had tried to stop him. Friends, family, and even strangers had begged him to stay in Medina, to avoid the inevitable bloodshed. But Hussain R.A. answered them all with the same unwavering faith. I am not rising for power, nor for rebellion. I stand only to revive the true teachings of my grandfather, the Prophet Muhammad SAW. I will not bow to tyranny. As the caravan moved forward, the harsh realities of the journey became clear. The scorching sun beat down on them, and the endless desert stretched before them like an unspoken warning. One by one, those who had once pledged their support turned back, their courage faltering in the face of Yazid's looming army. Yet Hussain R.A. remained undeterred. He knew what awaited him. But he also knew that the greatest battles were not fought with swords alone. They were fought within the soul, against fear, against doubt. And his faith in Allah was unshakable, a test of loyalty. One night, as they camped under the open sky, Hussain R.A. gathered his remaining followers. Their numbers had dwindled. Only 72 men remained. 72 against thousands. Looking at them with deep love, Hussain R.A. spoke. The enemy is coming for me. They have no quarrel with you. If you wish to leave, do so under the cover of night. No one will question your loyalty. A silence fell over the group. The weight of his words pressed against their hearts. But not a single man moved. One by one, they declared their allegiance. We are with you, O Hussain. We will stand by you till the end. Tears welled in Hussain's eyes. These were not just soldiers. They were brothers in faith, ready to sacrifice everything for the truth. The sands of Karbala. As the sun rose, the army of Yazid emerged on the horizon, thousands strong, blocking the path forward. Hussain R.A. and his companions had reached the plains of Karbala. The enemy cut off their access to water, leaving them to endure the scorching heat with no relief. The cries of thirsty children pierced the air, yet Hussain R.A. remained patient, comforting his family, strengthening their resolve. One final time, he reached out to the enemy, offering peace, offering truth. But the response was clear. Yazid's army would not be swayed. The choice was made. The final battle was near. As night fell, Hussain R.A. stood in prayer, his soul at peace. He knew that by dawn, the world would witness not just a battle, but a sacrifice that would echo through history. Karbala was no longer just a place. It was a stage where truth would stand against falsehood, where faith would triumph over fear. The tragedy of Karbala. The morning of the 10th of Muharram arrived with an eerie stillness. The desert wind carried the scent of battle, and the sky above Karbala seemed to mourn what was about to unfold. Hazrat Hussain R.A. stood before his small group of 72 companions, fathers, sons, brothers, each knowing that by sunset they would be no more. Yet none wavered. The enemy forces, numbering in the thousands, loomed on the other side, their swords gleaming under the scorching sun. Hussain R.A. knew that their hearts were poisoned by greed and fear, yet he still offered them a chance for redemption. He mounted his horse and rode towards Yazid's army, his voice steady, his presence commanding. O people, if you do not believe in Allah or fear the last day, at least be free in your worldly affairs. Why do you fight me? Have I wronged you? Have I spilled blood? Have I betrayed anyone? But the enemy remained silent, avoiding his gaze. They knew the truth, but were shackled by their cowardice. Finally, Umar ibn Sa'ad, the commander of Yazid's army, broke the silence with a cruel order. Begin the attack. Arrows darkened the sky, raining upon Hussain's R.A. camp like a merciless storm. One by one they fell. One by one, Hussain's R.A. companions rode into battle. Each fought with the strength of 100 men, their faith unbreakable. But the enemy was vast, their numbers overwhelming. One by one, the warriors of truth embraced martyrdom, leaving only Hussain, R.A., and his immediate family. His nephew Qasim, the young son of Hazrat Hussain, R.A., stepped forward, his eyes burning with determination. "Uncle, let me fight." Hussain, R.A., hesitated, but he saw the fire of truth in Qasim's eyes. He kissed his nephew's forehead and let him go. Qasim fought bravely, but he was soon surrounded, his young body crushed beneath enemy swords. Then came Hazrat Abbas, R.A., Hussain's, R.A., beloved brother, the guardian of the camp. He fought fiercely, breaking through enemy lines to fetch water for the thirsty children. But as he carried the water back, the enemy ambushed him, severing his arms one after the other. With his last breath, he called out, "Mawla, forgive me. I could not bring the water." Hussain, R.A., ran to his fallen brother, cradling him like a child. His heart ached, but his faith did not waver. The martyrdom of Ali Asghar, R.A. Then came the most heartbreaking moment. Hussain, R.A., took his 6-month-old son, Ali Asghar, R.A., in his arms and walked toward the enemy. "If you have no mercy for me, then at least give this child a drop of water." But Yazid's soldiers had no humanity left. A soldier took aim and fired an arrow, piercing the infant's tiny throat. Ali Asghar, R.A., writhed in his father's hands before falling still. Hussain, R.A., looked to the sky, his eyes brimming with tears. "O Allah, bear witness to this injustice." He dug a small grave with his bare hands and laid his child to rest. The final stand. Now only Hussain, R.A., remained, wounded, exhausted, yet still standing. He mounted his horse one last time and rode into the battlefield. He fought with unmatched valor, cutting through the enemy ranks. But he was one man against an army. Soon, arrows covered his body. Spears pierced his flesh. Blood soaked the sands of Karbala. As he fell, he whispered, "O Allah, I have fulfilled my promise." Shimr, a soldier of Yazid's army, approached the fallen warrior. With heartless cruelty, he raised his sword and struck Hussain's, R.A., noble head from his body. The skies darkened and the earth trembled. The heavens wept. But Hussain, R.A., had not lost. He had won the battle of truth. His sacrifice would shake the world for generations to come. Karbala was not a defeat. It was the birth of a legacy that would never die. Aftermath of Karbala. The message lives on. The battlefield of Karbala was silent. The sand, once golden, was now soaked in the blood of the martyrs. The severed head of Hazrat Hussain, R.A., had been hoisted on a spear, and his lifeless body lay on the burning sands. The enemy had won in numbers, but they had lost in morality. However, the tragedy was far from over. The women and children of the prophets, Saul family, now orphans, widows, and captives, were forcefully taken to Kufa. Their feet bled from the scorching desert, their hearts burdened with grief. Among them was Hazrat Zainab, R.A., Hussain's, R.A., sister, who would soon prove that swords could kill bodies, but not the truth. The court of Yazid, a voice that could not be silenced. The prisoners were dragged into the court of Ibn Ziyad, Yazid's governor in Kufa. He looked at the exhausted, grief-stricken captives and laughed. He mocked Hazrat Zainab, R.A., and taunted her about the fate of her brother. But Zainab, R.A., did not cower. She straightened her back, raised her head, and in a voice that echoed through the hall, she declared, "O Ibn Ziyad, do you think you have achieved victory? You have slaughtered my family, but know this, our blood will awaken the world. You may have silenced Hussain's, R.A., voice, but his message will never die." The governor, taken aback by her courage, had no response. The court, once filled with Yazid supporters, fell into an uneasy silence. This was the first crack in their victory. The captives were then taken to Damascus, to the court of Yazid himself. Here, Yazid sat arrogantly on his throne, convinced of his success. The severed head of Hussain, R.A., was placed before him. He mocked it, playing with a stick against the lips that once spoke the words of the Prophet, Saw. Again Hazrat Zainab, R.A., stood. "O Yazid, Do you think you have succeeded because you have killed the family of the Prophet? You have only secured your place in disgrace. Hussain R.A. is not dead. His sacrifice has ensured that truth will rise above falsehood forever. Her words shook Yazid's court. Some of his own people began to whisper in doubt, realizing that they had supported a tyrant. For the first time, Yazid saw that Hussain R.A. had truly won. The spark that ignited revolutions. The news of Karbala spread like wildfire. The people of Kufa, who had betrayed Hussain R.A., were consumed with guilt. Many rose in revolt, seeking repentance for their cowardice. From this guilt emerged the Tawabin movement, a group of Muslims who vowed to avenge Hussein's R.A. martyrdom and fight against tyranny. The shock waves of Karbala reached beyond Kufa. The revolt of Mukhtar al-Thaqafi took shape, where Yazid's cruel commanders, including Ibn Ziyad and Shimr, were hunted down and killed for their crimes. Over time, the tragedy of Karbala became a symbol of resistance. From the fall of Yazid's dynasty to later Islamic movements that opposed oppression, Hussein's R.A. sacrifice continued to inspire. A legacy that never dies. The prisoners were eventually freed, and Hazrat Zainab R.A. and Imam Zain al-Abidin R.A., the only surviving son of Hussain R.A., returned to Medina. But they did not return in silence. They carried the story of Karbala, ensuring that the world would never forget the day when truth stood against tyranny. Today, Karbala is more than history. It is a reminder, a call to choose between right and wrong, a lesson that true victory lies not in power, but in standing for justice, no matter the cost. Lessons from Karbala, a legacy of truth and resistance. The Battle of Karbala was over, but its message had only begun to unfold. The sacrifice of Hazrat Hussain R.A. and his companions was not just a moment in history. It became a beacon of resistance, a lesson in standing for truth against all odds. A choice between dignity and submission. Throughout history, many rulers have demanded allegiance through fear. But Hussain R.A. proved that no power, no throne, and no army could force a righteous soul to bow to tyranny. When Yazid demanded his allegiance, Hussain R.A. had a choice: to live in comfort under injustice or to die with honor for truth. He chose the latter, showing that a believer never compromises on principles. This lesson has echoed through time. From the early Islamic revolutions against oppression to the anti-colonial movements of the modern era, Karbala has inspired countless leaders to stand firm against injustice. Inspiration for scholars and leaders. Karbala's message did not remain confined to history books. Scholars, philosophers, and revolutionaries have drawn strength from Hussein's R.A. stand. Imam Abu Hanifa, one of the greatest scholars of Islam, opposed the tyrannical rule of the Umayyads, drawing inspiration from Hussain R.A. Jalal al-Din Rumi, the famous poet, compared Hussein's R.A. sacrifice to the ultimate struggle for the soul's freedom from worldly chains. Mahatma Gandhi, the leader of India's independence movement, said, "I learned from Hussain R.A. how to achieve victory while being oppressed." Nelson Mandela, who fought against apartheid, saw Karbala as a lesson in never surrendering to oppression. These figures from different faiths and eras understood what Karbala taught. True victory is not in conquering lands, but in standing for what is right. The emotional power of Karbala. The tragedy of Karbala is not just a story of war. It is a deeply human story. A story of a grandfather's love, a brother's sacrifice, a mother's tears, and a child's last breath. Hussain R.A. was not fighting for political power. He was fighting so that future generations would know never to accept oppression as normal. His sister Hazrat Zainab R.A. proved that words can be sharper than swords. Even after losing her family, she stood before Yazid and declared his defeat. She showed that truth does not die when its champions fall. It grows stronger. The call to every generation. Karbala is not just an event of the past. It is a test that continues today. Every time we see injustice, we face the same choice: to stay silent or to resist. When we see oppression, do we turn away or do we speak up like Zainab R.A.? When we are pressured to abandon our values, Do we compromise? Or do we stand firm like Hussain R.A.? When the world offers comfort at the cost of principles, do we accept? Or do we sacrifice for truth? Conclusion. Karbala lives on. The sands of Karbala have long settled, but the blood of Hussain R.A. still flows in every heart that chooses justice over fear. His sacrifice was not for one time, one place, or one people. It was a universal stand against tyranny. As long as oppression exists, the cry of Labbaik Ya Hussain will echo in the hearts of those who refuse to bow to falsehood. Karbala was not a defeat. It was the greatest victory ever won, because truth never dies. Karbala, a story that never ends. The battle had ended. The swords had been sheathed. The battlefield had fallen silent, and the oppressors had declared their false victory. But Karbala was not over. It never would be. As the sun set over the blood-soaked desert, a gust of wind carried the cries of the fallen, the voice of Hussain R.A., the echo of his sacrifice, the whispers of the oppressed who had died for a cause greater than life itself. For Yazid, the battle was political. For Hussain R.A., it was a fight for the soul of Islam, a fight to ensure that no tyrant, no matter how powerful, could ever distort the message of justice and truth. The eternal victory. Yazid had an empire. Hussain R.A. had only 72 companions. Yazid had wealth, armies, and palaces. Hussain R.A. had nothing but faith. And yet, today, the name of Hussain R.A. shines like a beacon, while Yazid's name is a symbol of disgrace. Why? Because power fades, kingdoms fall, thrones crumble, but principles, sacrifices, and truth, these never die. Hussain R.A. did not fight for land. He did not fight for revenge. He fought so that generations to come would understand that it is better to die on your feet than to live on your knees. A lesson for every heart. Karbala did not end on the 10th of Muharram. It lives on in every moment where truth is challenged by falsehood. It is not just a historical event. It is a test for every generation. When injustice rises, do we stay silent or take a stand? When we are tempted to compromise on our beliefs for comfort, do we remember Hussain R.A. and choose dignity over ease? When we see oppression, do we ignore it, or do we speak like Zainab R.A., who made Yazid tremble with her words? Karbala is not a tragedy. It is a call to action. A reminder that every one of us will face a moment where we must choose to stand with truth no matter the cost, or to bow before falsehood for the sake of convenience. The legacy lives on. The story of Karbala was not written in ink. It was written in blood. It is carved into the hearts of those who refuse to accept oppression. It is a flame that continues to burn, lighting the way for all who seek justice. Even today, millions mourn, not because they see Hussain R.A. as a man who lost, but because they know he won in the greatest way possible. His message survived. His sacrifice was not in vain. His story became a revolution that never dies. And so, the question remains. When your Karbala comes, will you choose truth, or will you bow to falsehood?